If we are going to unite and be strong, we need a new face to help do that.
The room was in total silence.
We're shocked.
We were all in shock.
I believe he couldn't get to 218.
And I'm sure the right person will come forward.
In a shocking move, Representative Kevin McCarthy stepped down today in the race for House Speaker. The vote has been called off now until the GOP is confident another candidate can acquire enough votes for that nomination. And that's where we would like to begin our roundtable today. And joining us live now for today's Newsmax Now roundtable, Republican strategist Ford O'Connell. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks. Great to be with you guys as always.
All right, Ford, we were talking on Twitter before, some papal level politicking going on in Washington, D.C. But as important as it is, the position of House Speaker is often referred to as one of the most difficult jobs in Washington, like herding cats. So finding a suitable candidate who might actually be able to do the job and get things done is going to be difficult. Who would actually want this position?
Well, it absolutely is going to be difficult, but it's even more difficult when you're the party out of the White House, because the House Speaker doesn't just have to herd cats. They have to be a Machiavellian media maestro, and you have to work the media over as well. Look, this was an earth-shattering bomb drop in Washington, but you want to know what? There's a couple people that could get to 218. The only question is whether or not they want the job.
Yeah, there are some reports coming out of Washington now that Speaker Boehner is basically crawling on his hands and knees, going to Paul Ryan, begging him to get into the race here, because he might be the only guy who can put together the 218 votes needed to elect a speaker. What do you hear about that?
Well, let me say this. Paul Ryan doesn't want the job. The reason is he does love his current House committee position, but also understand something else. Paul Ryan still believes that one day he could run for president, and being Speaker of the House would be a black mark against it. So Paul Ryan wants to keep his options open, but, you know, he may reconsider. I will say this. The only other person that I believe as of right now, and this could change in the next 10 minutes, that could get 218 is Trey Gowdy, but I think he wants to go back home to South Carolina and one day become an attorney general.
So we have a list of potential frontrunners. Let's see if we can pull that up again. I'm just curious who you think is next in
potential
line.
Frontrunners include someone currently not in Congress?
Well, I just saw something, too, that said Newt Gingrich, you know, there's this talk of having a placeholder come back in. Newt Gingrich might be open to that idea, which would be very interesting. But Steve Scalise, Tom Price, Trey Gowdy, who you mentioned, Kathy McMorris Rodgers, and then Jeb Hensarling, you know, out of those, I think Kathy McMorris Rodgers, with McCarthy staying in the leadership position, you know, that kind of signals that it's going to be somebody who's already part of the leadership, and she is.
So you don't think Webster has a chance?
I don't.
Well, no, I don't think. I think Dan Webster was basically a political patsy. He's dead in the water. It was for the House Freedom Caucus to be able to flex their muscle and get behind someone and put a face to it. I will say this. Look, you can come to a compromise very easily. Here's what happens. The establishment side actually wants to make the government function, and the House Freedom Caucus wants to have a seat at the head table. They want someone in leadership, and they want some of their folks to have plum committee positions. So until that happens, John Boehner is going to still be the speaker, but they can't get to that 218.
Yeah, that is the big irony about all this. The whole point was to get John Boehner out of the Speaker's office, and now he's going to be there, you know, indefinitely until they can find somebody who can get those 218 votes.
Well, you guys, you make a great point. Let me say this about the House Freedom Caucus, okay? I understand that they represent Main Street America, and Main Street America is pissed off. But the great thing in Washington is you have to have tactics. Okay, you want to throw Boehner out there. What's the next step? Always think 2 steps ahead like Machiavelli, and you'll be in better shape next time.
So if you were going to put your money behind anybody, who would it be?
My money would be behind Paul Ryan.
Okay, okay. Now I have
every time he thinks he's out.
I wouldn't place the bet. I would just place the bet on who the minority leader is going to be, which is Nancy Pelosi.
That's a good bet.
Well, I will never forget your face when McCarthy made those comments. You weren't here, John, but it was priceless. Ford literally was like this, shaking his head. He had his forehead. Do you remember this? I wish we had it right now. And just like in disbelief, McCarthy had made those comments. Now we're hearing that the reason he's stepping down is because of that gaffe.
Well, that has part to do with it.
But there's some other things circulating.
I will say this. Here's what I will say. I believe that gaffe opened the door to the possibility of him stepping down. But when he walked around the Capitol Hill this morning, he was as confident as could be. Very few, if any, people thought this was possible. He walked into that room, is my understanding from people in the room, basically said 2 sentences and dropped out. I think there was something a lot more in play here. I don't care what the internet conjecture says, but there's a lot more in play here than just the Benghazi gaffe.
Well, tomorrow, I'm sure the story is going to continue. We might talk a little bit more about this letter that Congressman Walter B. Jones sent around talking about skeletons in the closet. A lot of innuendos there. Kevin McCarthy.
PC way of putting it, John.
we don't want to jump out too far ahead of this story, but folks can go online and read the Twitter rumors all they want. But it's not necessarily a good thing for Kevin McCarthy. But Ford's coming back. We're going to talk a little bit more about Hillary Clinton's pivot to the left.
Yes.
Is it a mistake? And also, Ben Carson, is he really a victim of the Main Street media? What am I trying to say? Mainstream media?
Mainstream.
Right. Mainstream media.
Yeah.
Or does he have a problem with little foot and mouth disease? Little
foot and mouth syndrome. Do you think he caught it from McCarthy? We'll have to find out. We're going to talk about that coming up. Yeah, the past is kind of coming back to haunt him a little bit. But, we'll see if that will really affect his numbers. We'll have to discuss that with Ford O'Connell.
It's not affecting his poll numbers at all. That's part of the discussion. Now, a lot of this has to do with his comments, what he made in Oregon. And there's some controversy there.
A little bit. We'll talk about it coming up.
The State Department had emails that they gave to the committee that was formed, we now know, to politically, in a partisan way, go after me, not investigate what happened in Benghazi.
That was presidential candidate Hillary Clinton speaking during an interview last night with PBS, taking another opportunity to exploit Representative Kevin McCarthy's gaffe over those Benghazi committee motives. The question now is it working to her advantage? Let's turn to our roundtable to find out. And rejoining us once again, Republican strategist Ford O'Connell. Thanks for sticking around, Ford. What do you think? Is this helping her?
Well, it was working to her advantage until the FBI decided to go over to the State Department, pull out 4 more servers, and then basically expand it to a second tech company. Look, here's what she's trying to do. In the law, we call this fruit of the poisonous tree. She's trying to say, because of what McCarthy said, everything that comes after that has to be discounted. And guess what? Hillary Clinton's got to understand this ain't going away. This is going to stick with her. The only question is whether it's the front story or the back story as she marches her way to 2016.
Now, as she does this, Ford, she's trying to outflank both Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders to the left. She's come around on some union issues. She's now against the TPP, which she helped to establish. She's come out against the Keystone XL pipeline. But this reminds me a lot during the Republican primary process when you see a candidate like Mitt Romney, who says he's severely conservative, try to appeal to the base of that party and then have to kind of redefine themselves in the general election. Is she making a mistake here on this, trying to outflank Bernie Sanders?
Well, let's say this. When it comes to the TPP, that was the political flip-flop of the 21st century, and she's put us all on notice that she has the political convictions of a weather vane in Hurricane Katrina. Here's what she's trying to do. You're correct. She is trying to outflank Bernie Sanders. She's sick and tired of him getting headlines, and she's sick and tired of his big crowds, and she's also trying to scare the bejesus out of Joe Biden. Herein lies the problem for Hillary Clinton as she pulls left. If she does win the nomination, which I think she's going to do, the question is whether or not President Obama, out of spite, thwarts her and doesn't allow her to basically reconvene the Obama coalition in the general election.
Oh, well, she's bucking him on the TPP. I mean, I don't know. That seems a little far-fetched, though.
The TPP, the Cadillac tax, Keystone Pipeline. Again, she makes Mitt Romney look like he never flip-flopped.
But he's not going to open up that to Bernie Sanders.
No, he's not going to open it up to Bernie Sanders, but he can open up to Joe Biden. Remember what the ace in the hole was for Hillary Clinton here. She can lose Iowa and New Hampshire. Iowa's 93% white, New Hampshire's 94% white. There's only so many hyper-educated white progressives. Where her strength lies is with minority voters, black and Hispanic. If Joe Biden gets in this race and President Obama puts his arm around him, guess what? That's a subliminal message that Hillary Clinton's in trouble.
Well, we talked about the left. Let's move to the right, shall we? Republican presidential candidate Dr. Ben Carson is receiving some flack for those comments about the Oregon shooting, recounting a time when he was held at gunpoint in Popeyes. Here is what he said last night on the SiriusXM's Urban View. Take a listen.
Guy comes in, puts the gun in my ribs, and I just said, I believe that you want the guy behind the counter. He thought I was.
That's what you said in that calm way.
In that calm way.
Okay.
He said, "Oh, okay." Over there.
And so you just redirected him to. Okay.
Ford, I have to ask you, does this kind of contradict what Carson had said about the Oregon shooting when he said someone should have stopped the shooting, come forward, and here he was just remaining calm and redirecting the shooter?
Well, here's what happened is you had a political neophyte basically outkick the coverage when it came to this situation, and he overtalked it. I will say at the same time, the mainstream media has long been trying to discount Ben Carson because he's a black Republican and they still have an Obama hangover. So it's a little bit of both here. It's a little bit of Ben Carson basically putting his foot in the mouth, but also the mainstream media has been discounting him left and right.
Well, let's not forget, too, the mainstream media includes Fox News, and they've been doing a good job of supporting him.
Pretty good job of that.
I mean, you don't get much more mainstream than Fox News when it comes to the mainstream media. But,
true.
You know, there was some question about whether Ben Carson was specifically referencing the Oregon shooting. And, you know, going back and listening to his comments, I believe he was. And then you had a guy, that hero who actually ran towards the gunman. This is...
The bottom line, though, is it's going to hurt him in the polls. And I don't think it's going to. Ford, what do you think?
I don't think it's going to hurt him in the polls, but understand something. If he's a cat with 9 lives, he just used one of them.
So if you were advising him, what would you tell him to do?
I would tell him that right now you can't keep out kicking the coverage and just running off, you know, on your own. I know that your strength is being authentic. I know that your strength is being calm. But right now, if you do win the nomination, the Democrats are putting this all on YouTube to run it on a loop over and over.
It's probably already up there.
There you have it. Ford O'Connell, probably so. Ford O'Connell, thanks so much for joining us here on Newsmax. Always good to have you.
Thank you.
And still ahead now, on Newsmax Now, ISIS and Toyota, the connection that has now launched an investigation. And visiting the happiest place on earth may not make you too happy for long. Just ahead, what visitors can now expect to pay at Disney. Plus, we want to know, is Dr. Carson your choice for the 2016 GOP poll, or is it Donald Trump? Go to NewsmaxPolls.com right now and cast your vote. We'll be right back.